number 3 of our videos about old St. Vincent. This is number 3. And if you're wondering why you see this picture of Sportsman's Hall, well, there's a pretty simple answer. Before it was St. Vincent, long before it was St. Vincent, it was called Sportsman's Hall. It was even called the Sportsman's Hall Parish because since 1790 there was a priest there, and he had church services in this building over here. This was Sportsman's Hall, and there is a monument at St. Vincent right to the north of the big Basilica that shows you where Sportsman's Hall once was. Then at about 1810, this building came, and then about 1810 there was an actual church built there. This was just a residence for the pastor and a place where he could have a chapel to have mass. But then this building was built, which was an actual church. In 1832, a priest named Thomas Butler came there, and he did this very nice black and white drawing, which I put color on. I think color helps to bring things together. Trainwreck Productions is doing this for you. Old St. Vincent number 3. If you want to see numbers 1 and 2, go to YouTube, put in a request for Old St. Vincent number 1 or Old St. Vincent number 2 in the place where you can put questions. This is where we were at the end of number 2. We were looking at the northwest corner of the Quadrangle at St. Vincent. This is no longer there, which is a big question mark in my mind. Why was it removed? This shows that same corner. I think of this as the old and the new. This is the old, and there's just a slight view of the new monastery that was built in the 1960s after the very bad 1963 fire. That is that very corner, and what you can see is a firewall. See, this is where the fire was stopped in the big fire in 1963. It didn't go past that. Now, there may have been water damage over here because the firemen stationed themselves at this firewall to make sure that the fire didn't go past this firewall, and it did not. But there was likely some water damage. But there's a St. Vincent production called St. Vincent Past to Present, which categorically states that this area was removed because of fire damage, and that's not true. So I'm just curious. Maybe somebody can tell me why it was removed. This shows you that part of St. Vincent when it was first starting out. This is 1855. 1855 was the year when St. Vincent was made an abbey. And it started out from this building right over here. This was called the pastor's residence. It was built in 1835, the same year that this church was built. And this is how the Quadrangle began. The Quadrangle began and moved from north to south and had this old church right in the middle of it. A drawing I did in 1970 showing the fire damage, how it stopped at the firewall. This is the Quadrangle, or what's left of it rather. See, the Quadrangle at one point used to go the whole way over to this corner, which is now gone, and the whole way up here and over here to Placid Hall, which was built about 1886, which completed the Quadrangle. This shows the fire from up in the air, January 28th, 1963. See, this was the original Quadrangle. That was it. And at one point, that was what St. Vincent was. There was no more, except the outbuildings, the farm buildings and shops. The fire was stopped right here. You can see that. And my big question was, why was all this removed when the fire was stopped here? Maybe somebody knows that. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the beginnings of other structures outside of the Quadrangle. This was Andrew Hall that was built to make a connecting link with the Basilica, the big church. This is an old drawing, shows the Quadrangle, but it's not in good proportions because it should go further north this way and further south this way. That's the actual proportions of it. This shows it to be a bit more compressed. And in this area right here, this is where Andrew Hall was made, built, and then came out and connected with the new Basilica that was built. That is the new Basilica, or the big church. And if you're questioning why you never saw those towers, the answer is no one ever saw those towers. They got to a certain point and realized that they were out of money again. And they just stopped and capped these two towers. The Basilica had been designed by an architect from New York, William Schickel, who was also from Germany and a Catholic. And they tried to follow his design rather carefully, except those towers, which they ran out of money. This was Abbot Andrew Hintonock. He was abbot after Boniface Wimmer passed away. And it was during Abbot Hintonock's, Andrew Hintonock's abbacy that the new Basilica was started. He had a lot on his mind. What I mean by that is there was the Basilica to build, and there was this large brewery controversy going on. And Abbot Andrew never really wanted to be an abbot. He protested, but his confreres told him that they thought he was a great guy and they wanted him to be abbot. And he grudgingly said, okay, I'll do it. But after 2 years as abbot, he petitioned Rome to be relieved, and they refused. And then after 2 more years, he petitioned again. That was after 4 years, and he was finally relieved. And we'll see in a little bit just who the abbot was who replaced him. Here's the original Quadrangle. And this is where they started to build out. This was the building that was named for Abbot Andrew, and this is the Basilica. This is the way the Basilica started. An interesting sidelight is the person who did the surveying for the Basilica, the guy that went out there with his transit and actually figured out the points where it should be made from, was Sebastian Wimmer, who was the nephew of Boniface Wimmer, who had come from Germany to found St Vincent. This is mapping from 1887. It was in this area here that the new Basilica would be built. And we're going to start by looking over at this area. We'll get a picture. These are farm buildings. This was the slaughterhouse. And we all like to eat, but we don't always like to think about where our food comes from. And it was thought that this building would not be a good place to have right by the new church, so it was moved down in the back of the first floor of what was built as the machine shop. You can see construction proceeding. This is another building that we'll get a look at. That was the old schoolhouse that was built before the Benedictines arrived, and it was where they lived, first of all, right when they arrived, before they had anything built that was good enough to live in. This shows a date in 1892. It was on this date that the cornerstone for the new Basilica was laid, and at that time the new abbot was blessed. That was the new abbot. Take a look at the rest of that day. That was Abbot Leander Schneer. Leander was the third abbot of St Vincent, and he's the guy that took over the building of the big church. That was in the 1890s when the church was coming up, not finished yet. Inside, this guy, that's the same person as over here. Brother Wolfgang Traxler. He was a brother who oversaw the construction of the new church. And these are the guys that built it. A really polyglot group. If you look at the instructions or the rules for the workers, you'll see it was written in English, German. Not just that, there was Slovak and Polish also. It was a bunch of people from, a lot of different places. And if you wanted to know whether they did a good job, just go to St Vincent someday and take a look at that basilica inside and out. You'll see these guys knew what they were doing. I think that's enough for this time, and we're going to shut it down and say so long until number 4. Bye now.